Warning, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar, Economic Impacts of OBBBA SALT Deduction Cap Extension Using REMI AI. This webinar is being presented by Shreya Gurov, Shan Shi, and Samuel O from REMI. I'm Brian Reel, and I'm thrilled to be the host of this presentation. At REMI, our mission is to inform public policy. We provide software that allows government and non-government decision makers to test the economic effects of their policies before they're implemented. We work in the fields of economic development, tax, transportation, energy and environment, equity, and much more. If you have any questions about REMI specifically, I encourage you to reach out to us at info@remi.com and would gladly connect with you or gladly connect you to the appropriate member of our team. If at any point during this during this presentation you have a question, I encourage you to put that question into the question box, and time permitting, I'll moderate these to our speakers. If we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to reach out to you personally. And I will also say that about an hour after the presentation concludes, we'll be sending a copy of the slides and a recording to you through email, so keep your eye out for that. And finally, I want to let everyone know that GoToWebinar has a cool new feature where you're actually able to zoom in on the presentation. So if there's any charts or graphs that are too small for you, you can actually just click into it and scroll in, or press the plus button or the minus button and scroll around, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. So definitely give that a shot. And that's enough from me from now. So again, thank you all for joining, and take it away, Shane.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. My name is Shane, along with two other interns, Shreya and Samuel. Our topic today is the economic impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, state and local tax deduction cap extension. So in today's webinar, we'll be looking at how the bill reshapes the state and local tax policy. We'll focus on two case studies, California and Texas, to show how the same federal policy can produce very different outcomes. So before we dive into today's topic, I would like to set the stage with some background. In 2017, President Trump signed Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into law, as known as the Trump tax cuts. It was the biggest change to tax law and the policy in recent decades before the One Big Beautiful Bill. And there were two key takeaways from this policy. First, this act capped the state and local tax or SALT deduction at $10,000 from the previous no limit deduction. And second, this act nearly doubled the standard deduction for individual filers, increasing it from $6,500 to $12,000. These changes had a major impact on tax filers. We found after 8 years, which is this year, the share of taxpayers who itemized deduction dropped from 31% to just 9%. People are more inclined to use standard deduction, and the cost of state and local tax to federal government decreased from $104 billion in 2016 to $13.5 billion in 2020. With that context in mind, I will now pass it to Samuel to walk us through how these changes played out specifically in California and Texas.
Thanks for the intro, Shane. Population growth in California has significantly stagnated, while net domestic migration numbers have been hampered following the 2017 bill. While there were certainly other factors that played against California, including their rapidly increasing housing prices and cost of living, the SALT cap introduced in the TCJA significantly incentivized Californians in the upper range of income to leave the state. On the other hand, Texas benefited from the TCJA given the state's no income tax policy. This is reflected in the fact that there were fewer people who itemized the taxes in Texas compared to California, both before and after 2017. And the average SALT deduction was lower at $9,187 compared to California's $20,451. I'll now hand it over to Shreya for a deep dive into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Before diving into the analysis, I would like to set a background on One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It was signed by President Trump on July 4, 2025, and it permanently extends and expands upon the provisions of 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we will specifically be looking at its implications on SALT deduction cap. It extended the cap from $10,000 to $40,000 effective beginning in 2025 for taxpayers making under $500,000. It will phase down the 40,000 SALT cap for individual taxpayers or couples making above 500,000 at a 30% rate. And finally, it would revert back to 10,000 cap in 2030 with no income limits. And with that, I will pass it to Shane to explain the categories of the SALT deduction.
Thank you, Shreya. So yeah, the SALT deduction generally falls into three main categories: income tax, property tax, and sales tax. We can see the numbers on the slides that the difference between California and the taxes are relatively striking. So for income tax, California has a progressive system ranging from 1% to 12.3%. And the higher your income is, the higher your rate. While Texas, on the other hand, has no state income tax rate at all. Then for property tax, California and Texas show not that big difference. However, for sales tax, this is where we see another relatively big gap. California's sales tax rate can be nearly 1/2 times more than Texas' sales tax rate, depending on their location. Now I'm going to hand it over to Shreya again to explain you the potential impacts behind these tax rates for individual taxpayers and estates in California and Texas.
Thank you, Shane. Looking at the potential impacts of these things on California and Texas, looking specifically at California, the taxpayers of a high tax state like California would benefit from itemizing deduction. It represents huge potential savings and directly translates into higher disposable income. And at a state level, this higher disposable income could mean excess boost or consumption or spending in the economy, and would reduce the incentive for people to leave California for tax reasons. On the other hand, the cap extension does not have substantially big benefits to taxpayers in Texas because of lower benefits from property or sales tax. Many SALT deduction payments are below 10K cap, so the increase of the cap from 10K to 40K have minimal effects. At a state level, the impact on disposable income is also limited. In terms of migration effect, under our assumptions, the benefits are less to none for the state of Texas, but I think it will be really interesting and intuitive to see a model with Texas and California combined to see the population flows and demographic dynamics between the two states. And I'll pass it to Shane to give you a detailed layout of our model.
Yeah, thank you, Shreya. So now I'm gonna go through the model we used for this study. So we used a REMI tax PI model, which is designed to evaluate the dynamic economic and fiscal impacts of tax and other policy changes. This model is built on our PI plus model, but with additional features that allow agencies to perform various economic analysis, such as budget forecasting, fiscal impacts analysis, and other economic or policy evaluations. On the right side of the slide, this is a framework showing how the policy variables link, interacts, and flow through the model. We have four main buckets types of tax for this model, which are property tax, sales tax, corporate income tax, and personal income tax. Now we'll have Shreya to walk you through the policy variable we input for this study.
Thank you, Shane. The policy variable that we inputted is personal tax, and the way that we put it inside the model is a negative personal income tax to reflect on the tax savings on a federal level by all the individuals, and this is a collective amount for the state of California. And we did the same for Texas as well. And I'll pass it to Samuel to go and walk us through the methodology.
While our models can help determine the outcomes, we do have to determine the inputs into the model. We utilize the two methodology approach to ground most of our predictions on the impact of SALT on real government numbers as much as possible. The first methodology uses 2017 IRS numbers on percent claiming SALT and average SALT claimed. The second uses 2022 numbers on percent claiming SALT, while we made estimations for property, sales, and income tax. The first methodology clearly underestimates the average SALT claim, as property values, property tax, and income tax have all increased since 2017. But it overestimates the percentage claiming SALT, since the standard deduction is markedly higher and fewer individuals will switch back to itemizing their deductions. The second method properly evaluates the average SALT claim, but underestimates the percentage claiming SALT, as more individuals may be willing to switch back to itemizing given the higher cap of SALT. These two values provide the range of values we believe is reasonable. So in California, in both methodologies, we determined the federal tax savings per user and the total number of users of SALT. For the federal tax savings, we used the 2017 average of SALT claim, subtracted it by 10,000, then multiplied it by 24%. For the total number of users, we multiplied the total tax filers in 2024 by the percentage claiming SALT in 2017, which resulted in a 17.33 billion per annum savings for consumers. In the second methodology, we estimated the 90th percentile property tax and added it to the 90th percentile state income tax by using the corresponding 90th percentile property values and income. Using this value subtracted by 10,000, then multiplied by 24%, we obtained the federal tax savings per user. As for the number of users of SALT, the total tax filers multiplied by the percentage of claimants of SALT in 2022. This results in $12.81 billion per annum savings, so that 12.81 to 17.33 billion would set our range for California. We used a similar process with Texas, with some added complexity because the SALT average we calculated was below the original $10,000 cap. So instead, we estimated the standard deviation for the 10,000 and 40,000 cap. Using those numbers, we then determined the percentage of users exceeding 10,000 using the z-score in the normal distribution, which was found to be 21.97%. And we also estimated the average SALT claim using the same normal distribution, resulting in a value of $10,860. After conducting the same process as earlier, we multiplied the resulting savings per user by the number of users, getting $148.01 million in annual savings. The same process was used for methodology 2, but simply with estimated sales tax on $35,000 discretionary spending and property tax on a $400,000 property in Texas. This sum is $9,500, and we estimated the standard deviation to be $2,500, given the increased variability from the extension of the cap from 10K to 40K. In a normal distribution, we get the 42.7% percentage of users exceeding 10,000 and the average SALT claim of $11,824. Multiplying all together, we arrive at $193.2 million of savings annually, giving us a range of $148.01 to $193.2 million per annum. Now, Shreya will explain the different state responses to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Thank you, Samuel. And looking at the different responses of California and Texas to one federal policy, we made a distinction between the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the One Big Beautiful Act. The SALT deduction cap under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, specifically looking at California, is 10K, and under One Big Beautiful Bill is 40K. And the SALT paid is $28,715 under both the cases. The federal standard deduction being $15,750. Now, under Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the standard deduction of $15,750 is a lot higher than the SALT deduction cap of $10,000. So people have less incentive to itemize their deductions, and they rather prefer the standard deduction with tax savings of $3,780. Under the One Big Beautiful Bill, the cap now being extended to $40,000, the entire SALT amount paid of $28,715 is now eligible for deduction, which is a lot higher than the standard deduction of $15,750. So people have more incentive to itemize the deduction and have a tax saving of $6,892, which is more than under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Looking at Texas, the SALT deduction cap being 10K under TCJA and 40K under OBBBA, the SALT paid is $9,500 in both cases, and the federal deduction being $15,750. The SALT paid of $9,500 is less than the 10K cap, irrespective of the cap being extended from $10,000 to $40,000. Therefore, the standard deduction is more appealing than the SALT deductions since they're more. and the effect on the tax savings is quite minimal. It remains at 3,780. Now I'll pass it to Shane to go and walk us through the economic results.
Yeah, thank you, Sharia. So as what Samuel talked about earlier, we used the two methodologies to evaluate the economic results for analysis. On this graph, you can see employment projections from 2024 through 2030. The upper line represents methodology 2, which is more focused on the 2022% of people claiming SALT with estimations including property, sales, and income tax, while the lower line represents methodology 1, where we used a number on percent of people claiming SALT in 2017. So that being said, what we really want to highlight to you this for this economic results, in this case, employment, is the light blue shaded area between the two methodologies. This area captures the expected variation, giving us a more realistic window of where employment outcomes may fall under this policy. And looking at this trend, we can also tell employment is projected to rise steadily over the next 2 years before the growth rate begins to slow down as the effects of slow deduction phase out. And next, let's look at how employment changes break down by industry. So here we're showing you the 5 sectors with the highest levels of employment: construction, retail trade, healthcare services, real estate, and state and local government. So across these industries, the general trend is similar, but the most dramatic changes fall under construction. We extended this analysis out to 2040 to capture the long-term effects once the slow cap reverts to 10K. Employment starts to decline around 2027, with most industries reaching their lowest point by 2031, but construction, on the other hand, in 2033. So overall, our results suggest that employment in these key industries will eventually fall below the point before the bill. And furthermore, GDP is the second factors we look into for this analysis. Same as employment, we used the two methodologies. The light blue shaded area represent the range where we expect GDP to fall. The pattern here closely mirrors the employment results, as like employment rises, GDP rises, and vice versa. We believe this relationship reinforces our analysis, as the employment effects we observed are directly tied to broader economic growth in the state. And here we're looking at changes in disposable personal income. So what we want to highlight here is the effects of the policy in the near term in California. We see disposable income rising steadily through 2030 as households benefit from the higher SO deduction cap. However, this boost is temporary. Our analysis suggests that the state's budget revenue can support this increase for about 5 years. And after that, once the SO cap reverts, disposable income begins to decline again and eventually falling back toward pre-policy levels. So the next factor we analyzed is demographics. As a high income tax state, California stands to benefit significantly under this policy. Households now have like more disposable income, greater buying power due to the higher SO deduction cap. We believe this will directly impact California's economic migration rate. As we showed earlier, over the past 15 years, California has experienced an increasingly negative net domestic migration, and that means more people are moving out than moving in. Our analysis suggests that the increase in SO deduction cap could be a potential turning point for California. Less residents will be incentivized to leave, while more people may choose to move into California, using the long-standing trend of out-migration. Yeah, so as more people choose to stay in or move into California, we also see an increase in the labor force. Looking at the graph, the adjustments to the policy begins around 2026, with steady growth continuing through 2030. But as we noted earlier, after 2030, once the SOL cap reverts, the advantages California gained from SOL cap deduction may start to fade. Economic migration declines, and over time, the trends will go back toward pre-policy levels. And now Samuel will show you the economic results in Texas and the comparisons to California.
Yeah, thanks, Shane, for those insights. Here we have the employment variation for Texas. As you can see, the scale of the changes are markedly different, as these are in the 2,000 range, while California was over 200,000 in employment variation. But it still reflects the same trend, slowing down starting 2027. In the extended analysis to 2040, we see similar trends to California, with construction taking the biggest influx. This is due to the fact that property prices will see significant gains as housing becomes more affordable due to the ability to deduct the aforementioned property taxes. But because real estate takes a smaller portion of the economy as opposed to California, it has a relatively smaller influence on the real estate employment numbers. The indicators here show that there is an approximately 100 times smaller impact as California was in the $15 to $25 billion range in GDP impact. This reflects the roughly 100 times smaller savings that were introduced to Texas as opposed to California. As you can see in this extended analysis, there is a precipitous drop following the reversal back to the $10,000 limit following 2030. There is a considerably smaller impact on disposable income compared to the output, as opposed to California's near equal impact on those two categories. But personal disposable income does not dip below the baseline, in contrast with California's case. This reflects the fact that when we're turning to a relatively more austere environment, the fact that Texas faced a smaller tax savings in the first place lessens that impact. As you can see, the labor force population steadily rises, but the number of economic migrants spikes, then regresses back to the baseline as businesses and individuals adjust to the new 40K cap. Here we provide a graph displaying the magnitude of the difference this new policy has towards a higher tax state, such as California, which is highlighted in blue, as opposed to a lower tax state such as Texas, which is almost negligible. Now Shreya will demonstrate some of our AI capabilities.
Thank you, Samuel. We'll do a live model run using REMI AI. REMI AI is a powerful new feature in next evolution in policy analysis. It streamlines your workflow by generating high-quality deliverables, such as one-pager, PowerPoint presentation, and a comprehensive report directly through the model results. I would also like to emphasize on the security of this tool. REMI AI relies exclusively on REMI model documentation, and it understands the model really well, which ensures accuracy and reliability without pulling information from any external sources, thus keeping your data secure. And I would love to show the live model. So I'm using the TaxPI California model, and I have a methodology, a simulation generated. So this is the results page and the output page, and the way that you can generate a report is by going to REMI AI report. And I have generated a report, but I can walk you through the process of generating the report. So when you hit on design a new report, you get to select your title for the report. You can put in your title in this tab. I've put in as economic impact of OBBBA, SALT deduction cap extension. And it also lets you put in a little description of your simulation. So the report could be more accurate. So the description that I've put in is the SALT deduction cap extension from 2025 to 2030 under one big beautiful bill, which increases individual federal tax savings. It increases disposable income, and you can add more description lines if you want. This lets you choose a template for your report economic summary that walks you through total employment components, personal income, population. We have economic development that walks you through final demand components, employment in key industries, inflation adjusted disposable income. There's a demographic study which talks about population, net economic migration, labor force participation rate, income study, which is final demand components, inflation adjusted disposable income, compensation rate, cost of living, and you can also create or custom your own report. For now, I've done an economic summary for my analysis. And when you hit one report, you get a report generated like this. I have pre-generated this report. And an interesting feature is that if you select any paragraph on this report and hit Edit AI, then you can either shorten, summarize, explain, or expand on this paragraph that you've selected. So for instance, if I want to shorten it, this is going to generate a shortened version of the paragraph. And I have the choice to apply this newly generated paragraph to my original paragraph, either retry or dismiss it. And this also, you can export this report to Word, Excel, generate a PowerPoint of this analysis, and also generate a one-pager. I have generated a Word report of this, which looks like this. It gives you a first title page. It also has a contents page. It goes on and gives you an abstract, executive summary, talking about the economic output, GDP, overall output, employment and labor force indicators. It also has data from the outputs result tab. It also has total employment components and graphs that support the data and analysis. More tables that talk about the data on the outputs tab, personal income, population, and a conclusion tab. It also includes an appendix of glossary, and then there's also another appendix of REMI model framework and model linkages. The PowerPoint looks something like this, with the first slide being the introduction and title of the slide, the executive summary that walks you through employment, population, GDP, output, personal income, and it further broadens and elaborates employment components where you have a graph and a table supporting your analysis, and a key takeaway pointers, personal income with another graph and table, and a key takeaways of the analysis, population, and a conclusion tab. And lastly, the PowerPoint, the one-pager that is generated in PowerPoint looks like this, with the table of top employment sectors or top 5 key industries, which was construction, retail, trade, ambulatory healthcare services, real estate, and food services, and average job change in thousands. There is a multiplier for average change in GDP in billions. We have an employment components pie chart with private non-farm employment, and government employment. And lastly, a population chart with economic migration and population changes. With that, I will conclude the live demo and pass it to Samuel to conclude our webinar.
Yeah. In conclusion, California benefits the most in the short term as they have higher disposable income, boosting consumption, housing, and slowing the out-migration of high-income individuals. Keeping these high-income individuals is especially valuable for tax revenue generation and economic production. On the other hand, Texas sees limited gains because it reduces the advantage of its no state income tax policy. In the short term, it causes the aforementioned growth, employment, and GDP, while the increased discretionary spending may also increase state revenue through sales taxes. Additionally, local and state governments can afford to increase taxes, as this current policy effectively provides a tax break for those using salt. In the long term, the benefits fade once the salt cap reverts, and the 2017 to 2025 trend of out-migration in California may continue. However, given that the original 10K cap was set to expire in 2025 prior to the signing of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, introducing the current changes, it may be possible that Congress further adjusts the SALT cap before 2030. There are additional extensions to the work we've done today to provide more accurate predictions. We currently executed our analysis on two separate California and Texas models. If we use the joint California-Texas model, it would reflect the interstate dynamics more accurately, especially in terms of the demographic results. Additionally, while our two methodologies approach provides a reasonable range, those with access to more data or capable of developing better methods may be able to provide more accurate predictions to use as inputs into our model, especially regarding salt usage and average salt deducted value. Additionally, when the IRS publishes the 2025 numbers in 2027, it would provide a much more grounded baseline. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. We see this topic as central to understanding the economic future of states, and we hope this webinar gave you that same perspective. Please let us know of any questions you have at the moment, and we can answer them promptly.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Shane, Samuel, and Shreya for the excellent presentation, and thank you to all who joined the webinar today. As mentioned, we'll be shortly getting into the Q&A portion of the presentation, so if you have any questions, I definitely encourage you to enter those into the question box now, and we should have plenty of time to get to them all. I also want to remind everyone that about an hour from now, or probably around 4 p.m., we'll be sending these slides and a recording of the presentation, and if you have any questions once you get a closer look at those materials, do reach out to us at the email on your screen, and we would be happy to assist. So we have received some questions so far. The first one is, why does California show employment growth in the healthcare sector under OBBBA, even though the policy includes a significant Medicaid cut?
Yeah, I would love to answer that one. Thank you. Great question. Thank you. So we do acknowledge that there is a significant Medicaid cut in the bill, and the reason why we still see like a huge increase in our graph that in healthcare service industry is because in this study we're solely modeling the effects of state and local tax deduction. As what Shreya showed you earlier, we input one policy variable, which is personal tax in this case. So we're not taking Medicaid cut into consideration in this case, but this is a huge factor for us to developing our analysis in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. I saw someone raised their hand. We actually have no way of letting you ask the question, unfortunately. So do feel free to just ask it in the box and we will get to it in a moment. Another question we received is, does your model make a projection that this will increase consumption spending in some industries more than other industries? If so, what industries are most expected to be impacted?
I can take that one, thank you. So yes, there is a different impact in terms of industries and consumption spending. And the last thing that we looked at in terms of like consumption is housing consumption. It was greatly impacted by SALT deductions. And when the output results of the model also showed which industries have higher impacts. And we'd love to get back to you on that with more information on which industries are more impacted. And explain furthermore the model results. Thank you.
So much, Shreya. Thank you. Another question received is, you showed large increases in construction. Are there also projected to be large increases to earnings in people working construction? And then what industries are expected to see the highest earnings?
Yeah, I would love to take a brief answer to that, and Samuel, Shreya, please feel free to add on if I miss anything. In my opinion, I believe there would be an increase in the salaries for construction industry. Thus, we said in our GDP model that people's disposable income will be expected to grow in this case because the deduction in the state and the local tax and in the income tax, people are more able to hold more disposable income and thus gaining their higher buying power. So yes, we believe there will be an increase in the salary. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Shane. Another question received is, does the model address the loss in federal revenue/spending? This is potentially very large.
Yeah, we completely understand that, but our current webinar is just focusing solely on the effect of SALT, and I understand that's why we see significant gains in terms of GDP, in terms of employment. And I think definitely an extension to our work would be adding additional factors, including the huge cuts in government spending that were used to counteract these tax benefits.
Great, thank you, Samuel. And then another question received is, the AI feature looks very useful. Thank you. Can it be used for any simulation in the model?
Yes, the AI feature truly gives you or generates a report of the simulation in the model. So whatever simulations that you put in a taxpayer model, like the previous question of how it impacts state revenues and state budgets. So if there's another input variable that is added to it, another additional simulation that is created, then the AI feature graphs the outputs of that simulation and would generate a report on the additional simulations that you put in the as an input. So the AI really generates results from the outputs generated from the model, but we can always change the inputs and change the simulations and looking at various scenarios and analysis. Thank you.
Awesome, Shreya. Thank you. Great. Another comment we received. Someone mentioned that the cuts could include, people receiving less benefits, and switches to Medicaid requirements about like work requirements and things like that. And those people would switch to employer-provided health insurance rather than those funded by taxpayer dollars. So that's a really good point. Thank you for that. Great, and that's all the questions we received at this point. If you do have any more, do feel free to reach out to us on the email on your screen, info@REMI.com. We'd be happy to connect on anything involving this presentation or anything else that you're thinking of. So again, thank you to Shreya, Shane, and Samuel for the great presentation. Thank you to all who joined, and we hope you'll attend more of our webinars in the future. Thanks, everybody.